Good morning and welcome to The Artist's Well. We're now in our 4th season and our 98th episode, believe it or not. So I'm delighted this morning to have a very special guest as our first guest on season 4. And he is Waylon Gary White Deer. I know when I heard his name first, I was quite intrigued, but we're going to find out a lot more about him. So join me in welcoming Waylon. Good morning, Waylon. How are you?
Oh, good. Good morning there, Alan.
Yeah, you're well.
I hear you're very keen. You get that a lot, don't you? Yeah.
No one told me you're a comedian as well.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm fine. How are you doing? You had your tea and everything.
I've got my tea here, all ready and waiting. So,
Good.
Waylon, I was expecting to make contact with you via Zoom over in Oklahoma, where you live, but in fact, you're up in Donegal.
I am in Donegal.
Yeah,
the hills
tell
of
me about
Donegal.
that. How did you end up there?
And the McGinley coach, direct from Parnell Square, brought me here.
I see. Yes.
Well, no. Several years ago, I was living in Dublin. I lived in Dublin for about 4 years. And a friend of mine recommended Donegal, and so I checked it out and decided to move from Dublin to up here. So I spent 4 years here before I left, and then I keep coming back. And and then people recognize me and stuff.
Yes.
And they just think I never left. They just think I'm a recluse, but really I've been coming and going now for about 3 years. But I've lived up here 4 years in the Gaeltacht. Yeah.
But you've also been to Dublin for a good while, haven't you, as well?
Yeah. Well, in 1995, I was asked to be one of the walk leaders for a Afri walk in Mayo. And that was the first time I was in Ireland ever. And it was, Dublin. And then later I lived in Dublin. I lived in different places in Dublin. Lived in Crumlin.
Yes.
I lived in Donnybrook.
Did you?
And some other place I can't remember.
Okay.
Before moving to Donegal and then going back to Oklahoma. And then
back
in spurts, I guess.
Okay, so what was the original motivation that brought you here?
The original motivation was that I was invited by AFRI, Action from Ireland, which is a very small NGO, to be a walk leader because the Choctaw people in 1847 donated 170 American dollars toward Irish famine relief. And so it forged a link, I suppose, that really got started, I think, because of a friend of mine, Don Mullen from Derry. He's a author, humanitarian and social justice type journalist. And he knew about that donation. So he sort of revived it, brought me to Ireland, and then I was asked to come back several times, to represent that link.
Okay. And tell me, Waylon, were you actually aware of this connection before then?
I was, because when I was in secondary school in the States, I was sent to the library. I think it was biology class. I had to do a report on my tribe because I don't know, I wasn't paying attention, I guess. And so I got this book off the shelf called The Rise and Fall of the Choctaw Republic. And I put it on the table. And much like the Reverend Ian Paisley might have done in his day, I opened the book and closed my eyes, and I stuck my finger in the middle of this page, and there was the story. It was about a paragraph, and that's where I first learned about it. So it stuck in my head. I was in Indian boarding school, which is not a posh thing like boarding school would be here in Ireland. Is a bit more like an industrial school, I guess. So that's where I learned about it.
That's kind of interesting in itself, because it's sort of part of the whole sort of repression and re-education process that America went into, and I suppose that gives you a certain affinity with Ireland. Being
because the more I started to learn about Ireland and Angkor Timor, the Great Hunger, and even preceding that, the flight of the Earls and so forth, I started being able to compare what happened to the Choctaw people was what happened in Ireland during the colonization period. Very much the same stuff, even to the point of being evicted, removed, people dying of starvation and so forth. we all had that going too, uh, with the American government and their military. So, and then you're able to put yourself in context with the rest of the world where colonization, has been and is still in many cases, and the marks that it leaves on the people.
Yes, yes. So you would have been acutely aware, though, even though you went into boarding school and were sort of being almost retrained in your mindset. Wasn't that the intention of these boarding schools?
Originally, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which got started as part of the American War Department, helped to construct a series of these schools throughout America where Indian kids were sent. And in the beginning of this boarding school period, which I guess is still continuing, John Collier, this person who was the superintendent, I guess, of those schools, or maybe he was the superintendent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, his idea or goal, which was replicated throughout that system, that re-education system you're talking about, was kill the Indian, save the man. And well, there were girls in those schools as well, but just
Yes.
use the word man. So that was the philosophy, and many of them during certain periods were run by certain religious groups, and so they were very keen on making sure people were Christian and so forth. So
Yeah.
so it got less repressive as time went on, because there was less to change about the kids. I think the kids were becoming intergenerationally more and more like Americans,
Yeah, of
like
course.
mainstream Americans. And so in my day, they weren't washing our mouths out with soap for speaking our languages or anything, or but it was still, I think it was repressive. I don't know. That's what I kind of think. But also too, you were shoved in with people from other tribes, and so you got to kind of get buddies with people like I did with Creeks and Seminoles and Chickasaws and stuff, other people besides Choctaws, and I thought that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And just on that particular subject, I gather that there's something like 800 different tribes of native Indians.
There could be tribal nations. Yeah, there's quite a few, but they're all kind of pushed into this colonial model that the Americans have devised, and
Yes.
all under control of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So they call that status semi-autonomous or quasi-sovereign.
Yeah.
So they're allowed to have casinos, but they can't have a standing army and navy, which would
Oh,
make the Americans
yeah.
a bit nervous, probably.
Of course.
So
Of
anyway,
course.
so it's economic development versus national sovereignty, the sovereignty we used to have.
And tell me, like Ireland, where we have our own language, is there a sort of a revival, amongst your tribe of your particular language? Because I believe the languages are, miles apart.
Well, yes,
Some of them.
different tribal languages
Yeah.
belong to different linguistic stock or groups, and so they're
Mm.
mutually unintelligible in many cases, most cases.
Mm.
But here in the Gaeltacht, Ireland is losing their native language. They reckon in about 10 years, only a minority of people will be able to speak, Osceola in the Gaeltacht that Ireland has. So using that sort of as a compass, you might say that's what's been going on in America as well.
Yeah.
Um, I find when people want to do a language revival, what they don't understand, what the linguists don't understand is, number one, it's supposed to be a community language. It's not supposed to be a decorative
Mm.
or an ornamental language. That's what someone up here told me. Our Irish, for a lot of people in Ireland, is a decorative or ornamental language. So our languages are becoming that. And the second thing is, in my experience anyway, your native language is supposed to be an expression of your worldview, your unique worldview. But if you have a bunch of people who have a mainstream Western worldview after so much assimilation, then they're learning that language is not going to help much, because they'll still be thinking, as mainstream Westerners. And
Yes.
that's the trick, I think, to reintroduce that way of thinking. I think some people call it the recitation or something of the indigenous mind, and
Mm.
that's something that's slipping away. You can learn a
Yes.
jillion different native languages, but if you're thinking like someone who is a mainstream Westerner, you're going to be using that filter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people here, a good friend of mine, Owen McGill-Abrijo, said people in Ireland, for example, who have school Irish, and he doesn't, he's a native Irish speaker. When people here who are native Irish speakers try and talk to them, it's very difficult, because they don't have nuance. They can't turn corners verbally and
Yes.
and go to other places.
Yeah.
It's Jimmy Statu, Tom Egomoy, kind of
Boy.
stuff, even if it's beyond that. And
Yeah.
for example, um, Michael D, very fluent Irish speaker. Most people don't reach that level in school Irish. So again, I think it goes back to what's in your head. Do you have a traditional way of looking at things? I
Yes.
had
Yes.
another friend that told me uh, the way some people in Ireland speak English is like the way she spoke Irish when she was a girl, that they have that thinking that comes out,
Yeah.
in the English language. So maybe it's a bit complex, but I think where it starts and should end is, what's between your two ears? How are you seeing the world?
Yeah.
That a native language would be built to express.
Mm. Yeah. It's a very interesting
So I'm
perspective.
raving like Lord Buckley. I'm sorry. What?
No, I said that's a very interesting perspective on the whole thing.
Well,
Because I mean, we are doing our best to try and keep the language alive, and they've just launched a new
uh,
channel as an addendum to uh, TG4,
oh
and
yeah.
aimed at children. So
Mm,
there are movements to try and keep it alive. That's for sure.
mm,
But I
mm.
do take your point. Tell me, where did your interest in art come from? Because I mean, most of the people we're talking to here are artists.
Yes, well, I guess the reason I paint is comes out of a communal place.
Mm-hmm.
I know most artists who are European or European American or whatever, they're all wild and free, woohoo, and they're humanists. Oh, they
Yes.
express themselves. But my father used to paint in the middle of the night on the kitchen table. He used to wake up in dreams, he said, and he used to go paint his dreams. And he said, the little people, Konokasha, we have little people in my tribe, used to help him mix his colors. And all this was going on in the middle of the night on the kitchen table. And I used to creep out of bed and watch him paint. And that's where that started.
Yeah.
But I found out the kind of art that he was doing, a lot of Indian people in his day and time as painters, was really community art. We don't have a word for artist and in the Choctaw language, and we don't have a word for art. So it was very much a communal expression rather than an individualistic kind of development. And the kind of art he was doing was very flat and two-dimensional, sort of like Byzantine or maybe early Egyptian art. And this is what a lot of Indian artists were doing. They weren't trying to replicate one another. but it was just coming out that way from people who weren't very materialistic, who in some cases were highly spiritual and had no formal, I guess, humanistic art background.
Yeah.
They were in a class somewhere in boarding school, and somebody gave them some paper and some colored pencils, and that's how it all started. And that's that. So I was second generation to that.
Yeah. I was intrigued by that fact that there's no word for art in your language. And equally, I believe when you talk about communal, I also understand that the idea or the concept of signing your work is also a bit strange.
You're right. You're dead on. So for the first time ever in these tribal nations' histories, people were signing their work to things. Very much the same as in Europe when you started going into the low Renaissance from the Byzantine people. Byzantine time, artists started signing their work and taking credit for their work. It was no longer communal, maybe religious-based art. It was, the rise of the individual and
Yeah.
the glorification of artists and all this stuff,
Yes.
which
Yes.
led to people today having art shows, drinking prosecco out of plastic cups and remarking about what's on the wall. I think if you're a visual artist, so that's where all that started, I think.
Yeah.
And it kind of didn't really catch hold uh, in America because our uh, our relatives, our tribal people, couldn't afford to buy what we were producing, so we had to produce for a foreign market or a kind of a mainstream white audience.
Yes.
And so it was kind of odd. We were doing traditional pieces, from our cultures, but for a commercial audience.
Yeah.
So that was a dimension, I think, that still shows up in my work today, but that shouldn't be unremarked upon.
Mm-hmm.
That unlike in Ireland, where you have an Irish artist, Irish audience, and they're giving that person euro, we still don't have a big enough economic audience among our own tribal nations to do
Yes.
that for us. So
Yes.
it's still, even though that genre I paint in is almost dead, meaning most of the people that paint in it are dead,
Mm-hmm.
except for a few like I.
Yeah.
It never did reach that stage where our tribal nations were wealthy enough to support us as artists, and it's kind of a um, strange concept anyway, culturally. New concept, I guess, and sometimes it gets mixed up with craft. People who bead or who do baskets and so forth. And
Yes.
so, yeah.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah. Okay. Um, when you talk about art and so on, you how would you before we see some of your work, how would you describe your work? Because it's very unique, very individual.
oh, thanks. It is unique, but if you see it within context, you would say that is what
Mm.
they call flat work or traditional Indian art. And so within the perimeters of and the boundaries of flat two-dimensional, minimal shading, and minimal use of foreshortening with the human figure and so forth. Uh, Loads of Indian artists from about 1920s to maybe 2000 developed their own styles.
Mm.
So I would say it's my own style within a larger genre that's almost dead.
Okay.
That started out very flat, very two-dimensional, and through succeeding, I guess, generations became more and more three-dimensional. And but this subjective use of color, I suppose, that's a feature of my art, isn't limited to just me.
Mm.
So if somebody wanted to do a turquoise horse with a white mane, they could do that. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
no one would tell them they couldn't.
But it's the
And so,
spirit behind it, isn't it? That really shows through.
yeah, I think as that subjective use of color is a way of seeing the world that I didn't really realize fully until most of these people, passed away. My contemporaries. I came back from Ireland after living here about 8 years. Most recent had been coming over since '95, but and I said, well, hardly anybody's here anymore. And I started looking at the legacy, visual legacy they left, and I thought to myself, we were all seeing the world differently from people who were going to art school.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Tell me the reaction of your father when he first saw one of your pieces that you were
Well, it
proud.
wasn't when we first saw it, but I did a piece I thought looked pretty good. It was very hard to get a compliment off the guy, you know. He himself was fairly good in that old school, old style type Indian art. But I visited him one day, and I had a painting of, I think it was a lady with a water jug or something, and she was sitting down looking contemplative or whatever. And he set it on his kitchen table. He stared at it, and he started doing this like he was directing music.
Yeah.
He didn't say a word. He just did that. And I think that was the best compliment I ever got.
Yeah. It sounds like it. Yeah, yeah.
But he didn't say anything. He still didn't say anything.
Okay.
But that was great.
Yeah.
So I thought I had done something anyway.
I know. I am.
Yeah.
I know everyone is going to be asking the same question. Your name, your surname, where did that come from?
Well, it comes from the old White Deers from Carrick Fergus, great Protestant family.
Your whites.
No, old White Deer, yes.
Oh, white.
Yes.
Oh dear.
And no, well, it goes back to a family member here. That's the only name they had.
Hmm.
That's the only name they had. And so it's remembered and it's recorded, but this is like about 4 or 5 generations back. And so the people that knew about that when I was coming up, that I could have asked are gone now. But from what I heard, it's like in Choctaw belief, anything that's white or albino is like sacred to
Yes.
that species. So it's not a war name.
Mm.
Isitohabi is how you say it in Choctaw. It's not a war name, but it's part of that. How that person got that name, that part's been missed.
Okay.
You
And is
know,
that all?
just
Is that
through time.
always? Yeah. Is that always carried on through the women
No,
and
it
men?
became a surname.
Hmm?
Became a surname, and then it was truncated.
Yeah.
The deer was dropped for a while. The American government thought it sounded more American. You know, it wasn't white deer. Then but no, it's we didn't have surnames when that man lived or existed.
Yes.
Isitohabi was his name. So this whole idea of surnames, that's kind of new for us.
Okay.
We didn't used to have those, so they
But
don't go back that far.
but White Deer was a family name.
No, it was just this guy's name, one of my ancestors. And then
Right.
when they were recording business, I guess, with the family or maybe a census, I think, they wrote that down as someone's last name. But it
Okay.
was never intended to be a family name.
Okay.
It just so happened that name got caught up in the American European system. You know, that, you know, you have to have a last name, you have to have a surname, you have to have a Christian name.
Yeah.
And we never had any of that. We never had any of that.
But you would have had a name as to distinguish you from your siblings or whatever.
Oh, you would have had your own name, all right.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have reflected on your father.
Mm.
You know, some sort of male line type.
I understand. Yes.
You know, naming like they have in Europe. So that throws Americans and Europeans off. You know, they think that these names have been inherited since the Iron Age or something,
Sure.
like their last names, and they're not. You know.
Okay. All right.
So.
All right, Waylon, we're going to move on to showing some of your work. But before I show the art, I want to talk about your writing.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Writing is something that I think we should talk, because I know you'd almost consider yourselves more a writer than an artist, nearly, would you?
I don't consider myself an artist or a writer.
Oh.
I write and I do visual art. At the moment, I'm recording an album with Steve Cooney, and but I also kind of like hang out with my friends and all this, and so I don't really consider myself an artist, and my tribal community doesn't consider me to be an artist or a writer. A lot of my cousins, they're not great readers anyway. They read Burger King menus and stuff, but they don't. You know, I wrote a book no one in my family actually has read yet. So I don't really consider myself that. There's a guy named Waylon Jennings. He was an American country singer, and he said, "Someone calls you an artist, that's a compliment. But if you start calling yourself an artist, you're in trouble." So I always try to remember that.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
going to show your book here. Hang on a second now. Where are we? Yep.
Okay.
There. Can you all see that?
Yes.
You can. I'm going to read an intro. Sorry, it's not an intro. It's a review. This is available on Amazon as a Kindle or a book. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's called Touched by Thunder. And it reads as follows. It's just a short bit. Touched by Thunder is an extraordinary journey of remembering that deeply explores Indigenous experience through autobiography, story, song, poetry, and art. An honored artist and scholar, White Deer weaves a multi-layered world of childhood and family, tribal communities, Indian boarding schools, celebrities and presidents, tribal elders and priests, robbers and rioters, Irish and Muslim immigrants, and even the prophet Bubba. The swirling text is illuminated with 16 of his original paintings printed in full color, as well as black and white sketches. White Deer's ingenious and visionary book traverses the fields of history, Indigenous and First Nation studies, memoir, and the arts, and is an engrossing read for a broad audience. Nice little preview.
That's great. Wow, who wrote that?
Well, not you.
Oh, not me. That's right.
No, but I gather you haven't even read this book. You wrote it, but you haven't read it.
No, I read parts of it. I just sort of I don't know why I kind of flinch, about, the written word if I see my name associated. So I'm in the Smithsonian magazine this month. There's a big article, but I haven't read it. I had my friend Moya read it for me,
Yes.
and I asked her, did it do me any damage? And she didn't think it did. So
Well, that's good.
I just because when people write about you, sometimes they don't get it right. And I was wondering, because there was some censorship going on with this book early on, would I read it and get upset? So I just sort of read different things,
I
different
read it.
places.
It's I think you're safe.
You read it?
Yeah, I did.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, thank you.
Now, the other interesting thing about this book is that the preface is written by Martin McGuinness.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah,
that's right.
it definitely is. And actually, so it's an extremely good intro to your book. And you did this painting.
Well, it was after Martin died, and he and I were friends. Not political friends, not like revolutionaries together, but we were friends. But I really respected him and still do respect him so much. And I think as time goes by, he's going to emerge more and more as also as a humanitarian uh, leader, as well as one of the leaders of the continuing, I guess, push for a united Ireland. I know a lot of people in Dublin may not like what was going on in the north, but it wasn't a political friendship. So after he died, my great friend Don Mullen, who's from Derry, as Martin is, he commissioned a painting of Martin McGuinness based on a poem that Martin had written. So Martin was a very good poet. So he wrote a poem called Breck Gill, or Bright Trout, about the Irish native trout. And he used that fish's disappearance as a metaphor to describe what happened to First Nations in America. How we, at one point, were, I guess, presumed to be going extinct. So Gill was the name of the poem that I based the commission on. So that's Martin, a younger Martin, and there you go. There's a Irish trout, a bright trout, and you can see in the upper left corner Indians on horses, Trail of Tears, and so forth. There's a bit of Celtic knotwork
Yes.
And in the foreground, there's a collection of stones. One's shaped like a heart. And his widow, Bernadette, Bernie told me that after Martin died, there she is, Firkra, his their grandson. She visited Inch Island, where he had hidden a heart-shaped stone that he had written, "Love you always" or something like that. And just by chance, after he had passed away, she found that same little stone that he had hidden, with that sentiment. So I put that in the painting.
Lovely.
So this is taken in Derry, and one of the greatest greatest compliments I've ever gotten for a painting was that little boy. When he saw that painting, he went over and kissed it, and
Brilliant.
so he knew that was his grandfather. So then I knew that I had at least come near to hitting the mark as to
Very good.
yeah.
Very
So
good.
this is my children's ancestor, Sit Ade or Satanta, Chief White Bear, and he was captured under a white flag during a truce and imprisoned in Fort Richardson, Texas, by American Armed Forces. And so I painted this in solidarity with Irish nationalism in the north of Ireland. I had done a mural project in Derry, and was familiar with that cause. So you see St. Ade wearing a Sinn Féin medal, but and with a tricolor running through the painting. So in the upper right, you see a white bear. That was his name. And the upper right corner too, you see a military bugle. So when the American Armed Forces would attack the Kiowa, I married a Kiowa, descendant of him. He had captured an army bugler and forced that man to teach him bugle calls. So when the American army bugler would play charge, he would play something like retreat and confuse everybody.
Brilliant. I
And
love it. Yeah.
yeah, so and he died in Fort Richardson, Texas. He was part of the Onde, the top military elite in his nation, and they weren't supposed to be taken captive. They weren't supposed to be captured. So he was captured, under a white flag.
Yeah.
And so one day he put a blanket over his head. Where he was at, he was on the third tier of a prison that had a stone courtyard. So he put a blanket over his head and he just dove off the rails of the third tier and landed head first and killed himself because that was the code of his warrior society, that you weren't supposed to retreat or be captured. So in the upper left corner, you could sort of see the pictograph of that happening. And so that's a little bit about who he was, but in solidarity with a idea of a united Ireland. And so
Okay.
that's that painting
Yeah.
there.
Very
I
interesting.
think it's called Solidarity or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I
It's
think
been a
so.
while since I painted it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
this is a painting owned by Martin McGuinness that I gave to him. And so it's called A Prayer for Ireland, and it's just talking about uniting the four provinces. So you can barely see, I think, these four white birds of peace against the purple background. And then you see this Indian man wearing the tricolor like a blanket, and a little bit of Celtic knotwork maybe in the background, offering a pipe, as a prayer,
Yeah.
that there would be peace in Ireland. And I think at the time I painted that, there were still things going on in the north that weren't very peaceful.
Yeah.
So I had a peaceful intent when I painted that.
Very good. And
Yeah.
what size would that work be?
Oh, I think it's one of the. I think I painted it on an American canvas,
Mm.
And I think it's like a 24 by 30 inches. I don't know what that is in I don't know, kilowatts or pentagrams or whatever metric,
Kilowatts.
but
Yeah, no, it's not that. It's
kilowatts,
not that
yes.
big. It's just that some of your work is extremely big. Because I
I
remember,
know, yeah.
yeah,
That
Trina
worries
and
me
I.
whenever I get a commission that's really big. It's like, how the hell am I going to do this?
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it's small compared to some of my stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, because there's
yeah,
one up in Donegal Castle, Donegal town, that
yeah.
Trina and I bumped into purely by mistake, and we're very,
Wow,
very taken
did
by it. But we knew
wow.
nothing of you at that point.
Oh wow,
But that's still there. They bought it, didn't they?
it is still there. They put that painting in a contraption where it won't come off the wall. I think that's the only reason it's still there. I tried to
Are
borrow
we
it
going
and
to
they
see
couldn't
it? Do you
figure
think?
out how to. Yeah, I tried to borrow it and they couldn't figure out how to get it off the wall. So that's probably why it's still in the castle. But
Yeah.
so this particular one is called An Arrow Through Time, and that's the way I describe the Choctaw Nation of 1847 to famine Ireland. That the memory of that donation was like an arrow that was shot through time, the memory of which was lost until on our day, we have found that arrow and retrieved it. We hold it now in our hand. That memory of one poor, dispossessed nation reaching across half a continent and an ocean to help another poor, dispossessed nation, as the Choctaw and Irish were at that time, both poor and dispossessed.
Yes.
So you can see this Choctaw man shooting that donation, see a bit of coins in front of his face to Ireland. And so you see these hands receiving it. And on the left there behind him, you see an Irish mother and child of famine period. And Choctaws on the shore there looking across to Ireland. And I just meant it to try to capture some of the spirit of what I think is a transcendent little story from famine times.
Yeah. It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah. Well, this is one I that showed up in the book, that book that you were holding up. I don't think it's really that great. There's a lot of problems I see with figures, anatomy, and so forth, but it's meant to represent the Choctaw Trail Tears. So we were I guess removed or evicted by American military forces from our traditional homes in Mississippi over three very cold winters, and which a quarter of our people died along the way from famine, diseases, starvation, very much the same as what was going to happen in Ireland maybe 16, 15, 14 years later. So that's Choctaw Trail of Tears.
Yes.
Although my family didn't come over, some of my family didn't come over till much later. They hid out and ultimately hid out in a cave. So they were evidently, the family story is they were gangs of these southern Mississippians going around hunting Indians and shooting them. So when they came out of those caves, they found that their little cabin had been burned down.
Yes.
And what they wanted to know was if their seed crop had survived, because if their seed crop had survived, this would have been about 50 years after the main removals, then they would be able to stay longer in their ancestral home, but everything had been burned up. So they turned their faces to the west and walked the 600 miles to Oklahoma years later, after the main removals. So there were removals going on, not just in the 1830s, but the 1840s, the 1850s, all the way up to the early 1900s of
Yes.
Choctaw Indians to move to Oklahoma. And
Mhm.
so this just represents
Okay.
that,
Yeah. Dreadful period of time. Yeah.
I suppose. So this is a painting I did for a friend of mine, Damien Dempsey, who's very famous singer, Irish singer. And he saw another painting I did, and he wanted that you probably have, And oh,
Will I go to
thanks.
it?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, you can go to that.
Yep.
So Damien saw that, and he wanted a painting sort of like it. If you want to click back to that one that we saw that I did for Damien. So I didn't really do that painting again. So I don't know what the heck happened to me there. But anyway, I was very happy to accept the commission.
Yes.
And if you look above that woman's the woman's head there,
Hmm.
a bit to the right, that's supposed to be Damo. Probably didn't look like it, but they're in the background.
Ah, yes.
So
Yes.
anyway, I forgot what I named that, but come to think of it, a lot of these paintings that we're looking at came out as a result of me being in Ireland.
Yes.
You know, so
Mhm. Yeah.
Ireland has had an effect on my art. So this one I did before I even came to Ireland, and it's called Gallup Intertribal. And I used to take dance troops to the Gallup Intertribal Ceremonial in New Mexico. We were one of many dance troops from a lot of different tribal nations that would perform at night in front of the grandstands. And so you can see this Pueblo lady with a pot and Plains Indians, and there were just so many different tribes, so many different songs and dances and cultures there.
Yes.
And my little dance troupe, you know, was part of that for a little while. So that's where that painting comes out of. Gallup Intertribal, it's called. And I like it. I guess after I did it, I noticed, you know, that there was sort of a sweep there that looks like a wave. And so after Steve Cooney and I record this album, I want to use that for the what do they call it? The sleeve
Yeah.
or the album cover. So I'm going to use that
Sure. Yeah.
and
Beautiful.
just sort of,
Mm.
you startle people maybe. So
Yeah.
this one is the one we were talking
Mm.
about
Mm.
that is hanging in O'Donnell Castle or Donegal Castle in Donegal Town, and it's really big. I thought it was at the time anyway.
About
And I
6 feet
did
by 4,
this,
isn't it?
yeah, and I did this in Cashinagore, which is a townland outside Gortwork in Clahanili Parish, Donegal. And I did it way up there where I was living close to Arago. And I think all those things helped. And I think all those things went into the painting. And so originally the thought was I was honoring women, these clan mothers in Choctaw culture. We say you are what your mother is because little babies and children tend to see the world through their mother's eyes.
Mhm.
Uh, oh, airbrush. Well, I learned when, and so the question is, am I doing using airbrush in that? So what I learned was I did use airbrush for a while, and then I guess the generator broke, and then the airbrushes kept getting clogged with paint, and so I learned how to use a toothbrush. So you load a toothbrush bristles up with paint, and I guess you try it out, shake it, regulate it till it sprays a fine mist.
Mm.
So this work you're seeing that looks like airbrush here is actually just an ordinary toothbrush, cheap toothbrush that you can buy in the shop or
Mm. Yeah.
something, and then you load it up with paint, and then it's a controlled splatter, I suppose,
Yeah.
a controlled splatter.
Very effective.
Oh, thanks for that.
Yeah.
And
There's
so
a woman
these,
holding, sorry, Waylon.
right,
There's a woman holding a thing that looks like a sort of a fan on the left-hand side. And
yeah,
I saw that in another one as well. What exactly is that? It's just as a matter of interest.
a fan. Well, we use different bird fans, or they used
What is
to
a fan?
anyway. Yeah, it would be a feather fan. Yeah, so
Okay,
it's just a suggestion of a feather fan. So
thanks
you
very much.
see these three clans: Wolf Clan, Eagle Clan, and Buffalo Clan. So these are clan mothers, and then you see this. Finally, these hands in the foreground. They're carrying life, Ayokchaya, life force through time. So we say women are the carriers of the nation. You know, without women, we wouldn't be here. Our generations wouldn't be here. Our nations wouldn't be here. So this painting was meant to honor women, but they also give it another interpretation, which this is the life force that the Choctaw people gave to Ireland when they sent the $170 famine donation. It was used to buy wheat and loaded on a ship called the Macedonian, I understand, which left New York Harbor in the spring of 1847 and docked in Kingstown, now Dunleary. And so another interpretation then is the glow that you see in the hands in the foreground is that life force that's the Choctaw donation represents. So that's so I did that in 7 weeks. It took me 7 weeks, and I was just it's like painting and painting and painting. And my landlady kept trying to charge in and see what I was doing, and for some reason I didn't want anybody to see what I was doing. And it's the first painting I ever did where I got 5 wows. The first 5 people that saw it, I guess because it was big too, you know.
It is hugely impressive, and I really would recommend that anyone who's anywhere near Donegal town go and visit this in the castle. It is absolutely stunning.
Well, thanks very much for that. So I got to see it again last spring and comment on it, and to a group from Texas, I guess that was going through the place. So anyway,
very good.
There you go.
We're going to ask or invite people to ask questions because there are a few questions. But before we do, there is a book that you're working on at the moment.
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
and I think it's a way of procrastinating painting, really, because I keep writing. Right, no one's paying me to write a book.
Yes,
you know, no one asked me to write this book, but I'm writing it anyway because I want to.
Would you like to read a little excerpt from it before we go to questions?
I will. It's not very long, and it's the first time I read anything from it. But since you asked me about it in the pre-interview, I thought, well, maybe I should sort of acknowledge the fact that this is what I'm working on right now. And but I guess that's a good thing. I don't know. Yeah. And so there's a character in the book who has a quote that I'm going to start this book with if it ever gets published. And that quote is, "Time is an empire ruled by the wind," which means time keeps circling back. It's not a straight line. And so the people in the book, it's called the Cloud People. Time is going to circle back in its season. They'll have an opportunity if they keep their hearts to be Indians again. So anyway, let me see if I can read that. So it starts out Zurich, chapter 1. No one could see the beautiful dance because you had to dream it. And one night he dreamed that he was sitting in camp under a willow arbor with his aunt and her second husband. Their teenage son sat hunched at the end of the table looking bored. Everyone had been given a dinner plate. His aunt went to get a pitcher of sweet tea. Then he noticed something. His aunt, her husband, and their son were supposed to be dead. He was trying to remember the accident when his aunt came back with the tea. She began to pour. The beautiful dance has started. Can you hear them singing? Singing? Yeah, singing. Can you hear them singing? Who is the dance for this time? He asked. He left the table and walked through the camps until he came to an open field. A crowd had gathered. Some of the crowd were wearing buckskin. Others had on ordinary clothing. He went up to one of his friends and said, "Joe, I thought you passed out on the tracks and a train ran over you." Joe frowned. "Did the train run over me? I don't remember." A woman in a black dress came by and asked, "What are you doing here?" He turned from Joe and told her, "I'm dreaming of the beautiful dance." "You didn't eat anything, did you?" "I don't remember." "Well, then that's all right. Take my hand." "Why?" "We're going to your beautiful dance." Bobby stopped writing about the beautiful dance to have a good look around. He was in Zurich, sitting among a line of sidewalk cafe umbrellas that flanked the boulevard like a bank of river trees. Afternoon sunlight spilled over the tops of things, and an eagle plume fluttered from his black, flat-brim hat. An Inca band was playing down in the train tunnel, faint and haunting. The Incas were like Bobby was, Indians who had come from far away to make quick cash. I'm a painter, not a writer, he mulled. My paintings take me everywhere, and maybe I don't know where home is anymore. Because everything seems so far away. Everything does. He saw that his art agent had arrived. Dr. Giovanni Leonetto had the kind of thick neck that make big men in sports coats look like bouncers. Dense glasses caused the man's eyes to bulge, as if he were staring from a fishbowl. His agent walked up and frowned. Want to be the Inca in the train tunnel playing for change? I think maybe, I'm not too sure. That's
Beautiful, yeah. Lovely image
the
there.
first
Yeah.
the first little opening salvo of this great distraction. Oh wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Hope it gets published, Katie.
So that's
We'll
my
see.
daughter. Carol says, Waylon, your work is beautiful. The colors and detail are incredible. Do you use natural pigment?
Would that be pigment?
I think it probably is pigment.
Okay. No, I don't. I just buy. I buy acrylic. I had to provide for my family when I was during the time I was doing most of my painting, and so I just would buy acrylic paint that because it dried so quick, and then I would just sort of boom, I was away. So I was always painting to pay a bill or do something like that, and I needed paints that would dry very fast.
Yes. Okay. Michael Grant asks, I don't know if you mentioned the Kindred Spirits Choctaw Monument in Middleton to commemorate the 1847 donation by the Choctaw people to the Irish famine relief. That's from Michael Grant. Presumably you've seen that.
Yeah, I was there at the opening several years ago. I kind of have mixed feelings about that. It's not a unique phrase, but I was using it in the early 90s, Kindred Spirits, when I was in Cork. Mm-hmm. You know, around Skibbereen and doing interviews and so forth in the press. So I think it's visually, aesthetically, I think it's a great, it's beautiful. I guess my observation, I don't know if it's criticism, is if I were going to devise a monument to Irish generosity, I wouldn't create a circle of giant metal shamrocks, you know.
Yes.
So I guess you have to bring your own story to that monument because it's representing us as a circle of feathers somehow. Sure. So, but other than that, especially at night, you know, the thing really lights up. I think it's a handy, simplistic story that monument sort of represents now. That has been politicized, which I suppose was inevitable, but it's still a beautiful monument.
Sure. Yeah. Very good. Okay. Gillian says, amazing work. Margie Dunn, love the book. So emotional. Pauline Flynn, lovely to see your work, Waylon. Katie, wow, very visual. I'm looking forward to reading this book already. Remind me where I can get the first book. Well, it's available on Amazon, isn't it? In Kindle.
It is, yes.
Yeah, or physical form.
Yeah, and there's I think Curra Press, or what was that? Columba Press. Someone has it too. There's stacks of them in Dublin somewhere.
Okay.
And, yeah, that you can order. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if somebody is interested, they could always send me an email, and I can find out exactly where it is and pass on the information. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Okay, Leslie, is there an audio version that you will have to read it? That exit was transporting. Very good point. Are you going to consider doing an audio version?
I could, but I might
idea.
have a strange accent.
No, you have a wonderful accent.
I could use a different accent.
You could.
Hello. I used to do that in early days in Dublin on a bus. you know, just to take the piss, I would say,
Yeah.
hello, can you tell me where is the door? Anyway, sorry.
How to confuse everyone. How can I talk, Alan? It won't let me unmute. John, I think you're having problems anyway with that. So, you know, the only way you can do it is to try. Yeah.
Sorry.
Brilliant, insightful, and entertaining, fabulous work, says Morris.
Thank you. Wow.
Hey, anybody like to say anything in person?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Loud and clear.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. It's my honor to listen to you today, Waylon.
Oh, no, it's my honor to be here. I'm very happy about that. Alan collected me at the airport a couple of weeks ago, and right away he gave me that invitation. I thought, wow, I just hear about 3 minutes and I'm already getting a great opportunity. So, yeah, thanks for listening in and everything.
I'm a painter myself, played music as well, but in the last few years, well, I'm only half Irish anyway. My father's from India, and I've always felt an affinity to indigenous people from around the world for some reason or other. But recently, I've been making a conscious effort to connect with indigenous communities around the world. I've connected with some Aborigines in Australia. I've reached out to some Native Americans, but I haven't had much success with that. And I do have some friends from the Maori community in New Zealand as well. One of them in particular is a good friend of mine living here in Cork. His name is Rob Parata. I'd love you to meet him. But
very good.
You know, I'd have so many questions I'd like to ask you. So I actually do Airbnb in my house. I have a beautiful room looking out over Cork Harbour where I live in the historic town of Cove, which used to be called Queenstown, where many of the Irish who emigrated to America during the famine period were deported or left from Cove. And I would certainly like to invite you to come and stay with me for free, just because I'd love to get to know you. So you're very welcome.
Wow.
You're very welcome to come and stay with me as a guest. I would really be
thanks
very
for
happy.
that. Well, that's a beautiful invitation. I'll take you up on it. I'm in Donegal at the moment, but I have some business up here, and then maybe we'll talk after that.
Yeah, maybe Alan could give you my telephone number.
I will, of course. Yeah, I will, of course.
Great.
Great. One thing I forgot to mention, Waylon, which I think we should mention, is your involvement with Cartoon Saloon down in Kilkenny. Can you give us a very brief sort of synopsis where that's going?
Well, I'm very honored that one of the MDs of Cartoon Saloon, who remembered me from 1997. I was on the old Late with Gay Byrne. He was a teenager, and so he looked me up. I guess it stuck in his head somehow. And the Cartoon Saloon, I can't say too much about it because it's in development, but they're doing a new full animation feature. You know, as you probably know, you do, I'm sure, that Cartoon Saloon punches well above its weight. Won all these international awards in Hollywood, BAFTAs, and everything. So they're going to do another one. So very big honor. Very excited about that. And they brought me over to do some consultation about that because it involves Choctaw Indians.
Yes. And
artwork and all that. And so the other one is I was asked to be a producer for a film called Long Way Home, Vico Films out of Dalkey. So I'm doing that up here too. So we're going to do a shoot up here with two members from Kila. And so those are the things, I guess, two of the things I'm up to up here. But I also get to do a album of songs I wrote with Steve Cooney up here too. So those are the three things that brought me to Ireland this time.
Very good.
Cartoon Saloon and them other two.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Great. Okay, listen, we're after 11 o'clock. I tried to keep it within the hour. So
yeah. Okay.
Finish here. But Waylon, thank you so much. I mean, it was a pleasure having you on. And
Oh, it's my pleasure. No, listen, it's my
thank you.
pleasure. You
Thank
mean
you
we're
so
not
much.
just going to keep talking? Why? No, I'm joking.
And I promise I'll give you a
Look,
lift back to the airport when you're going home.
oh, yes, you did. Oh, yeah. It's a beautiful car, folks. He has a beautiful car.
Stop. Anyway, listen, thank you so much, Waylon. I'm sorry if we
very
haven't got everybody's comments in.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, okay. So look, best of luck in Ireland and with
Thank
all your
you.
ventures and your travels.
Well, thank you very much.
It's been lovely having you. Now, next week, we have a little surprise for you because we've got the premiere of a documentary that I made on a very interesting chap called Alex Skade, who lives in the wilds of West Cork and has a bird sanctuary. He cares for up to 80 animals or birds at any one time, but he's also an artist, a sculptor mainly. And he's a fascinating story. And the guy has been living off the grid. He's been living there for 15 years, I think, in his own plot of land, which he's built up into this aviary and everything else. And he does extraordinary work, both art and looking after animals. But he has been living off the grid for all of those 15 years, up to very recently. No running water, no electricity, no transport, no phone, nothing. He's an extraordinary individual. And I'm delighted to say that after we do the premiere of the YouTube documentary, he's going to come on the line as well on the Zoom to answer any questions and just have a wee chat with you. So you'll be getting a link for the documentary itself first, which will be at 10 o'clock, our usual time. And then at, say, about 20 to 11, we'll do a Zoom with him, and you can ask him any questions arising from the documentary. But I guarantee you'll enjoy it. It's very, very unusual. Let's put it that way. Okay. So look, thank you all for joining. Thanks again to Waylon for coming on board here. And I hope you enjoyed it. And welcome to the season 4 of The Art as Well. Thanks for joining. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, Alan. That was great.